Introduction. I remember playing a game of Monopoly with a friend when I was maybe 10 or 11 years old. I was doing well, but I was still losing, and that's when I realized that my friend, who was acting as the bank, was cheating by secretly moving money from the bank over to his own pile. Once I figured this out, I quit the game. Why play when it's impossible to win? In a nutshell, that's what's happening to you in today's America. Throughout your entire childhood, you were told about the American dream, and how if you worked hard and did the right things, you could build a good life for yourself. If you're reading this, then you figured out that something went wrong. Either someone's cheating, or they changed the rules without telling you. I'm here to tell you that this is exactly what happened. The generations before you actually did have a real shot at achieving their dreams. However, over time, so many people cheated and used shortcuts to achieving their goals that they ended up changing the nature and accessibility of American dream. They rigged the game, and now that it's your turn to play, they've made it almost impossible for you to win. WHO is this book for? Do any of the following criteria describe you? Comma, you're carrying huge amounts of college debt. Comma, you're an adult still living with your parents because you can't afford to move out. Comma, you're not able to find a job that pays a livable amount of money. Comma, you want to get married, but you can't afford it. Comma, prices keep going up, but your income doesn't follow. Comma, you've got health insurance but can't afford medical care due to the high deductibles. Comma, you joined some movement like Operation Wall Street or the Tea Party, or followed a revolutionary politician like Ron Paul or Bernie Sanders, and didn't see anything change. Comma, you feel that something's not right, even though the government and the media keep telling you otherwise. Then this book is for you. I've intended it to serve as a starting point, a quick, easy-to-read overview of the forces that have an impact on your life in some way, showing how they work by design to rob you of your rights, your money, and your potential. Although not comprehensive in scope, it should introduce you to these topics so you can get a sense of what's actually happening. You can and should broaden and deepen your understanding of these issues, comma, especially the examples that pertain most to yourself. It concludes with some suggestions for what to do with this new information, but that's a starting point as well. It's up to you to decide what to do next. WHOAMI. Alan Marshall is an alias. In reality, I'm a typical middle-aged guy. I've achieved my own American dream with a wife, 2 kids, 2 dogs, and a house with a white picket fence in the suburbs. Seriously, I've pretty much got it made, but over time, as I learned about how the game is rigged, how the odds are stacked against the next generation, I've come to realize that my kids are going to face huge hurdles in achieving their dreams, hurdles I didn't have to face. And it's not just my kids. I realized that a lot of people in my generation, and the majority of people younger than me, are in the same boat. Not only are most of them destined for a life of frustration and unfulfilled dreams, but the system that's holding them down is the same system that's choking the life out of this country. And it's all because some of the people who came before us decided to rewrite the rules of the game to benefit themselves and hurt the rest of us. Why write this book? I struggle every day with what to do about the challenges that I see so many people facing. My kids are too young for me to share all this with them. They're not ready. But there are lots of people who are, and just need a little assistance in seeing the big picture. That's why I wrote this book. If you read it and see things in a different way, if it helps you understand how the system is rigged against you, then you will have the chance to do something about it. I can't tell you what that something is. I don't think these problems can be solved with marches and protests. I don't even really think they can be solved through voting, unless we actually start voting for people who tell the truth and tell us up front about the hard choices we have to make. Perhaps we all just have to pull out of the system entirely. That's for you and your peers to decide. I'm just trying to do my part by sharing information, along with my wishes and prayers that others can pick up the torch and carry it forward. A word about data. Throughout this book, you'll notice that I raise concerns about some institution, and then later quote that same institution's research or data. For example, I talk about the Federal Reserve working contrary to the interests of our country, yet continue to reference information from the Federal Reserve Economic Data, FRED, system from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. Or I'll talk about the flaws in the way our government calculates GDP, and then use GDP numbers as a way to track economic growth. This is, unfortunately, unavoidable. In many cases, these institutions are the only sources of information available on certain issues, or at least the only commonly acknowledged sources. And to understand the issues covered in this book, we have got to be able to incorporate data into the discussion. However, to limit the potential for biased analysis, I follow 3 rules when using data. Cui bono. I try to ask myself who benefits from the data being reported and look for conflicts of interest. If the government wants to look good by reducing unemployment rates, then they have a vested interest in making those numbers look better than they actually are. I would much rather look for an independent organization or watchdog group to provide data. Look for minimally processed data. I tend to rely on data from Fred because it is not filtered or massaged. They report on national debt levels, for example, without trying to tell me whether they're good or bad. In contrast, numbers like the unemployment rate or GDP are heavily doctored in the ways in which they are defined, collected, and reported, so I don't consider those reliable at all. Compare similar numbers. In cases where the risk of corrupted data is high, such as unemployment rates or GDP, I try to use them more for comparisons rather than for an objective picture. For example, if every country has similarly flawed ways of measuring GDP, we can use those numbers to gauge the relative sizes of those countries' economies regardless of the accuracy of the information. If we look at unemployment rates over time, we can get a sense of trends, even if the specific values are wrong. You'll see the Latin words caveat emptor a lot in this book. They mean buyer beware, which is a mindset too many people have lost. When it comes to data, it means you shouldn't automatically accept what you're being told, whether it comes from a watchdog group or the Federal Reserve. I keep a skeptical eye and look for multiple sources to come together in a complete picture, and I would encourage you to be similarly skeptical. Collect information to prove to yourself that something is true, and don't rely wholly on anyone, including me, to tell you. Contacting the author. Poet Don Marquis reportedly said, "Publishing a volume of verse is like dropping a rose petal down the Grand Canyon and waiting for the echo. Writing a book like this one results in a similar lack of feedback, and I'd be very interested in hearing your thoughts. If you'd like to share your reactions to what's written here, tell me what you think I got wrong, share related information with me, or ask questions. You can email me directly at alan@defiantliving.com. I promise to respond to you as quickly as I'm able. Part I. The Money Masters. 1. How you're getting screwed by the money system. The few who understand the system will either be so interested from its profits or so dependent on its favors that there will be no opposition from that class. Let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws. Mayer Amschel Rothschild, 1744 to 1812, founder of the House of Rothschild. The point: our entire money system is based on debt, which requires constant expansion. In other words, inflation and even more debt. This means that your money keeps losing value, and they're going to keep pushing you and everyone else to take on as much debt as you can. It's theft, and it's debt slavery. There's an old saying that a fish doesn't know it's in water, meaning that when something surrounds us so completely, it's such an elemental part of our lives, it's easy for that thing to be invisible. Our money system is like that. We take money for granted. It just is. Nobody thinks about it or questions it. We know what dollars and cents are, and we know that we can't trade them for things we want, and we know that they're a store of value, right? The truth is, our money system has not been around forever. It's a fairly recent invention, and it was designed to steal value from you. 1913, the Fed comes on the scene. The U.S. Constitution says that Congress is supposed to manage our money system, specifically to coin money, regulate the value thereof. Point one, but in 1913, Congress punted and gave up that authority by privatizing the endeavor to an entity called the Federal Reserve. The government does have some input into this central bank, since it appoints the bank's governors. However, the 12 regional banks that make up the Federal Reserve are all privately owned, with banks being the only stockholders. 2. Why is this a big deal? Because a private organization, owned by banks, not a public institution, now runs our money supply. And because they're banks, and banks make their money by lending money, they naturally designed a debt-based system. That means the money system has to grow constantly, which means your dollars are worth less every year. It's a system that works for them, not for you. From a gold standard to no standard. Originally, the Fed was held somewhat in check by the nation's gold standard.